They found his helmet first, melted, warped, dripping black resin onto the basement floor like candle wax. The rest of the team assumed the worst, because minutes earlier, the entire concrete ceiling had collapsed, sealing the basement under 3 tons of rubble and igniting a firestorm that no one should have survived. Smoke thick enough to suffocate in seconds, temperatures hot enough to liquefy metal, no radio signal, no exit, no visibility, no rescue team coming back. Because command had already called it, firefighter down, no chance of survival. But what they didn't know was that beneath the collapsed concrete, buried under darkness, heat, and smoke, one firefighter was still breathing. Barely. He found pockets of air so thin they tasted like ash. He drank from puddles forming out of condensation on steel pipes. He crawled on his elbows through burning debris, dodging falling beams, following the faint sound of airflow like a lifeline. And for the next 7 hours, while the building burned above him and while his own team mourned him on the street outside, he refused to die in the place he'd come to save. This is the true story of the firefighter they left for dead, who lived long enough to save himself. His name was Daniel Cole, 24 years old, only 18 months on the job. And yet, on the morning the world decided to bury him alive, he felt like nothing could touch him. He arrived at Station 14 before sunrise, the air still cold from the night before, the streets quiet except for the distant hum of early commuters. The moment he pushed through the station doors, the familiar smell washed over him. Diesel fuel, wet hose canvas, old coffee, and the faint metallic scent of steel lockers. It wasn't pleasant, not exactly, but it meant home. His crew was already awake, gathered around the long wooden table with mugs in their hands. Ramirez looked up first. "Morning, rookie," he said, smirking. "You ready to save the city again?" Daniel rolled his eyes. "I'm ready to carry your old butt down the stairs again when you twist something." The crew laughed. Ramirez raised his mug in a mock toast. "Confidence, I like that." Daniel grabbed a chair just as Captain Halpern stepped in from his office, buckling his belt. "Big drill today," the captain said. "High-rise response, basement fires, entrapment scenarios." He gave Daniel a pointed look, which means you listen, you follow orders, and you don't get clever. Daniel nodded.
Yes, sir. He meant it. He always meant it. But even he knew that confidence had a way of slipping into places it didn't belong. The alarm hit at 9:42 a.m., a 3-tone burst, shrill, immediate, adrenaline in sound form. Every firefighter froze for a fraction of a second, a tiny, silent pause, before instinct took over and bodies moved as one. The speaker barked, "Structure fire, commercial building, possible occupants still inside." Boots pounded across the floor, lockers slammed, gear clattered, voices overlapped. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. His hands were steady, but his breathing was fast. He pulled on his turnout gear, pants first, then jacket, then hood, each piece sliding into place with the muscle memory of months of repetition. He grabbed his helmet and mask, snapping both onto his belt. The engine doors rolled open, exposing a blast of cold daylight and the distant column of thick black smoke rising over the city. The crew piled on to engine 14. The siren came alive with a wail that vibrated the metal frame. The truck lurched forward, and they were on their way. Daniel watched the city blur past, traffic parting, pedestrians staring, neon signs flickering in the haze of smoke. As the engine turned west, the smell hit him. Burning plastic, charred insulation, something chemical riding the wind. This wasn't a small fire. This was a monster. Captain Halpern's voice cut through the noise. Report says fire started in the basement. Electrical failure, old wiring. Ramirez muttered, "That building's a maze." Captain Halpern finished the thought. "And basements are death traps." Daniel swallowed. He'd trained for basement fires. The heat collects, the smoke settles low, the exits become choke points. Even with full gear, every basement fire is a gamble. The engine skidded to a stop. Daniel stared through the windshield. The building was an old textile warehouse, 3 stories tall, brick facade, narrow windows that once let sunlight in, but now spewed thick plumes of oily smoke. Flames licked the edges of broken panes. Sparks rained from the roof like fiery snow.
Fire crews from 2 neighboring stations were already there, dragging hose lines, breaking windows, shouting orders. Civilians stood behind yellow tape, some crying, some screaming, all pointing toward the entrance. "He's still in there," one woman cried. "My brother, he went downstairs." Captain Halpern didn't hesitate. "Cole, Ramirez, with me." Daniel felt his pulse spike. Basement assignment. The words carried weight even before the smoke hit him. The 3 of them advanced toward the building. Heat radiated outward in suffocating waves. The air vibrated with the roar of flames and the crackle of burning wood. Smoke poured from the doorway in torrents, rolling over their helmets like a living creature. Inside, visibility dropped instantly. Daniel clicked on his flashlight. A narrow beam of white cut through the black fog. "Stay low," Halpern shouted. "Masks on, follow the wall." Daniel dropped into a crouch and followed the captain down the hallway. His gloves brushed the coarse cinder block wall as he moved. His radio crackled with reports. Conditions worsening, roof integrity unstable, teams searching upper floors. Ramirez's voice came from behind him. "Rookie, how you holding up?" Daniel answered, mask muffling his voice. "All good." He wasn't. Not really. The heat was brutal, searing even through layers of turnout gear. Sweat soaked his back within minutes. His breathing quickened, the sound echoing inside the confines of his mask like a drum. They reached the basement stairs, concrete steps descending into a black void thick as storm clouds. Flames pulsed somewhere down below, casting faint orange glows that flickered like dying lanterns. Halpern pointed downward. "We cleared this level, fast. If he's down there, we find him." They started descending. Each step felt like moving deeper into the throat of a furnace. The heat intensified, smoke thickened, visibility shrank to inches. Daniel's flashlight beam bounced across walls covered in soot, debris scattered everywhere, fallen shelves, burnt insulation, melted pipes dripping tar-like residue. Halfway down, Daniel felt something shift beneath his boots, a vibration, barely perceptible. He froze. "Captain?" he called out. "Did you feel—" The building answered before the captain could. A deafening crack tore through the basement. The floor trembled, the ceiling jolted, metal screamed, concrete crumbled. Daniel looked up. The entire ceiling above them shattered. "Down! Move!" Halpern roared, but it was too late. A storm of debris fell. Concrete slabs, steel pipes, burning insulation, slamming into Daniel's back, knocking him off the steps, throwing him violently into the darkness below. He hit the floor hard. The impact stole the air from his lungs. Dust and smoke engulfed him like a tidal wave. He heard Ramirez shouting. "Halpern!" calling his name. Then another crash. A final slab fell. A wall of smoke blasted across him, and everything went black. For a long moment, Daniel didn't know if he was alive. He didn't know which way was up. He didn't know if he was moving, or buried, or floating. But then, slow as dawn, feeling returned. First, pain. Then, the ringing in his ears. Then, the realization that he was alone, buried, and the building was still burning. For several long seconds, Daniel didn't move, couldn't move. The weight pressing down on him was crushing, uneven, jagged. His ribs ached with every shallow breath. Dust filled his nostrils, his mouth, settling on his tongue with a gritty texture that tasted like ash and concrete. Somewhere above him, the fire roared, muffled but deadly, a deep, vibrating thunder that echoed through the collapsed structure. He opened his eyes, or thought he did. There was no difference. Darkness swallowed everything, a complete, absolute black that pressed against his mask from the outside. He blinked, disoriented. His gloved hands twitched, probing the air around him. They hit debris instantly. Sharp edges of shattered concrete, twisted rebar, splintered wood, something hot enough that he jerked away instinctively. Pain responded from multiple places, a catalog of damage he couldn't yet understand. His right knee throbbed. Something hot pulsed against his shoulder. His helmet felt crooked, digging into the side of his skull. His radio. He reached for it, forcing his arm through debris that fought him like thick sand. His hand brushed the device clipped to his chest. The relief was instantaneous. He pressed the button. "Cole, to engine 14.
Static. He tried again, voice tighter. Captain Halpern, Ramirez, anyone, do you copy? Only static crackled back. He swallowed, throat aching. He tried a third time. Mayday, Mayday, this is Firefighter Cole. I am trapped in the basement. Structural collapse, request immediate extraction. The radio hissed, sputtered, then fell silent. Not a single voice returned. The realization landed slowly, like a cold blade sliding between his ribs. Either the signal couldn't penetrate the debris, or they weren't listening anymore. He shook his head, trying to stay clear, forcing oxygen through lungs that felt too tight. Focus, check injuries, control breathing, find a way out. He tried moving his legs. The left shifted slightly. The right screamed with such sharp pain he clenched his jaw until it hurt.
Not broken, but definitely twisted, swollen, maybe pinned. He pushed at the debris around him, but the moment he shoved upward, another small chunk of concrete slid and struck his shoulder. The collapse was unstable. Any wrong movement could trigger more settling. He lay still, breathing hard. Above him, a deep metal groan shivered through the building, a structure on the edge of surrender. Heat pulsed through the debris. He felt it through his gear, through the gloves, through the mask. A heat like a furnace waiting to take a breath. He shifted his weight. A small cascade of dust rained over him. He coughed violently, each cough scraping against the dryness in his chest. Okay, he whispered to himself. Okay, think. He remembered the training. Basement collapses, entrapment. The instructor's words echoed faintly. When the ceiling comes down, the fire doesn't care if you're trapped. It keeps burning, you keep breathing, you keep finding air until someone finds you, or you find them. He pressed his hand against the floor, slowly sliding it along the concrete. His glove brushed something wet. Instantly, he froze. Water. He turned his hand, feeling the thin film of liquid beneath his palm. It wasn't much, a puddle the size of a dinner plate, but the coolness of it shocked him back into clarity. Condensation, from a burst pipe, or the heat cooling against steel. Either way, it meant moisture. Moisture meant he could wet his throat. Moisture meant he could stay conscious longer. He cupped a handful awkwardly, guiding it to his mouthpiece. He couldn't drink through the mask, he knew that, but he could pop the seal for 1 second if the air around him wasn't too toxic. He hesitated. The smoke in the pocket he'd fallen into wasn't as thick as he expected. He felt it in the slight coolness of the air, in the absence of choking pressure. A small void in the collapse was giving him just enough oxygen to stay alive. He lifted the mask slightly, just a centimeter, just enough to wet his lips. The water tasted like ash and rust. He didn't care. It hit his tongue like a shock of life. He pulled the mask tight again, sealing it. A crash overhead made him flinch violently. Something huge had fallen on the far side of the room. Dust filled the air again. Flames roared, louder than before. The fire was spreading downward. He had minutes before this pocket became unlivable. He forced himself to roll, shifting debris 1 painful inch at a time until he found space to move his arm freely. His flashlight flickered when he tapped it, dim, smothered by dust, but working enough to reveal shapes in the black. Concrete slabs, broken pipes, a collapsed HVAC duct, smoke drifting in slow spirals, revealing gaps between debris, airflow. His heartbeat surged. A gap big enough to breathe meant a gap big enough to crawl. He aimed the flashlight beam into the narrow channel, a jagged tunnel formed by broken ducts and fallen beams, barely wide enough for him to fit through on his stomach. But it was a direction. He turned himself carefully, gritting his teeth as his knee pulsed with pain. The air in the tunnel was visibly darker, smoke-heavy, but within it, he saw tiny moving currents, flickers, pulses, a subtle dance of air being pulled towards somewhere else. A vent, a broken window, an exterior opening, escape. He lowered his body to the floor, pushing himself forward on his elbows. Sharp debris scraped along his gear. Splinters tore at his gloves. His helmet dragged against the ceiling of the tunnel, sending tiny crunches echoing around him. Every move was a negotiation with pain. Every breath was a reminder that smoke pockets could shift at any second. Every pull of his elbows felt like dragging himself through the throat of a dying beast. Halfway through, his radio crackled. Not voices, just static. But the static was louder now, closer. He froze. If static could break through, then someone nearby was transmitting. He pressed the button again. "This is Cole. I am alive. Repeat, I am alive. Basement collapse, moving through debris, need..." His words dissolved into static. No answer. He crawled faster. The tunnel widened slightly until he reached a larger void, a pocket created by a broken heating unit on its side. This new space was big enough to sit up in. He leaned back, breathing hard, sweat pouring inside his gear. Heat radiated from above. Dust drifted like snow in the beam of his flashlight. He heard voices, muffled, distant, from somewhere above. His entire body went rigid. No survivors in the basement. Command wants the crew out of the first floor. We lost the helmet, but there's no movement. They were leaving. His own team was leaving. He slammed his head back against the wall, adrenaline punching through him so violently he nearly gasped. "I'm here!" he shouted, even though he knew they couldn't hear him through concrete and fire. "I'm alive! I'm right here!" His voice bounced uselessly around the pocket. The footsteps above faded. They were gone. The building creaked overhead, steel crying under heat. The fire moved downward. Daniel sat in the dark, the truth settling around him like fresh debris. He wasn't getting rescued. If he wanted to live, he had one option left. He had to rescue himself. Daniel steadied his breathing, though every inhale felt like dragging smoke through a straw. The void around him pulsed with shifting heat. The fire above him crackled, hissed, and snapped like a living thing, devouring every piece of oxygen it could reach. The building shifted again, a low, ominous groan of steel bending under temperatures it was never built to endure. He knew what that sound meant. Flashover was creeping. The entire basement could ignite in one violent breath. He couldn't stay here, not in this pocket, not waiting, not hoping someone would hear a voice that couldn't breach concrete. His fingertips brushed the floor as he reached forward again, searching for airflow. The air was hotter now, moving faster, slipping past his gloves in small, invisible currents. Heat rises. Smoke follows it. Air tries to replace it. That meant at least one direction led somewhere not sealed. Daniel turned toward the narrow gap between two collapsed pieces of ductwork. It was barely wide enough for his helmet, let alone his shoulders. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the helmet off. It caught on a jagged edge of metal, scraping loudly before he yanked it free. The moment cold air touched his sweat-drenched hair, a shiver passed down his spine. He clipped the helmet to his turnout coat and lowered himself into the crack, pressing his body flat to the floor. The concrete was warm, not hot yet, but not far from it. Ash drifted across his visor like gray snowfall. He began crawling again. Elbows forward, drag the body, push with the left leg, keep the right leg as still as possible. Every few seconds he froze completely, listening. He heard fire, he heard collapse, he heard the building dying above him. But every so often, between the groans and cracks, he heard the faintest whisper of ventilation, a soft, steady draw of air through some unseen fracture in the building's foundation. A path, or a trap. Either way, it was movement. He kept crawling. But it was the only route not sealed. He pressed his back against the slab and heaved. It didn't move. He pressed again, shoulder first, then both hands, then legs. His knee gave a violent protest, and he nearly cried out, but the slab shifted 1 centimeter, just enough to let a puff of fresher air strike his face. It was enough. He pushed again, harder, harder. On the third push, the slab lifted a few inches. It scraped against the beam above, sending a screech through the void. He squeezed himself through before it could drop again. The chamber he emerged into was tall enough to kneel in. Smoke flooded it, thick and swirling, but there was movement, real airflow. pulling upward through a narrow opening shaped like a cracked doorway. He turned his head. That's when he saw it. A staircase, or what was left of one, the charred skeleton of concrete steps leading upward through a haze of smoke. The bottom half was buried, broken, melted into twisted debris, but the top half? Accessible. Barely, but accessible. Daniel dragged himself toward the base of the stairs. The concrete was blisteringly hot. He could feel it through both gloves. He clenched his teeth and grabbed the lowest exposed edge, pulling himself upward. His knee screamed. He ignored it. He reached the next step, grabbing the blackened railing. The railing snapped in half, brittle from heat, sending him crashing forward onto the stairs. His mask banged against the concrete, cracking further. He froze. Air hissed inward. Tiny, barely audible. A leak. He pressed his palm over the crack instinctively. The hiss softened. He couldn't take the mask off. Not here. Smoke billowed so thick he could barely see his own gloves. He dragged himself up another step, and another. Each movement felt like the world was tearing his body apart. Halfway up, the stairs vibrated violently. A shockwave of heat surged downward. Flames erupted somewhere above, lighting the smoke in flickering orange. Daniel lifted his head. The doorway at the top of the stairs glowed like the mouth of a furnace. If he reached it, there might be another collapse, or open fire, or an intact hallway, or an exterior wall, or he'd suffocate before he even got there. He climbed anyway. Near the top, he slipped. His right leg folded beneath him, and agony exploded through his body so violently he nearly blacked out. He lay on the stairs, gasping, vision swimming. Then he heard it, a sound he hadn't expected in the heart of hell. At one point, the debris above shifted, raining sparks onto his gear. He curled instinctively, arms over his helmetless head. A chunk of burning drywall slid down the tunnel behind him. If he'd hesitated 3 seconds earlier, it would have sealed the passage entirely. He didn't look back. His air cylinder gauge beeped softly. He shifted the pressure gauge near his mask. Half tank? Maybe less. He couldn't afford panic. He pushed himself into a slightly wider space, a crossroads created by collapsed metal shelving. The shelves were twisted into jagged angles, some red hot, some dripping melted paint that sizzled on the floor. He scanned the space with his flashlight. To his left, thicker smoke, no movement of air, dead end. To his right, faint airflow, light movement in the dust motes, a chance. Straight ahead, complete black, no airflow, absolute silence. He turned right. The crawl space dropped slightly. The air grew cooler for a moment, a blessed change, then hotter again as the passage twisted. His knee throbbed so intensely he had to stop twice, pressing his forehead to the floor, waiting out the stabbing pulses of pain. "Come on," he whispered. "Move, move." The flames above roared louder. Something huge collapsed on the first floor. The entire building shuddered. Dust cascaded from the ceiling like a waterfall of ash. Daniel didn't freeze this time. He crawled faster. The right side of the tunnel narrowed again, pressing debris against his shoulders. His air cylinder scraped against a pipe, sending sparks flickering in the darkness. He twisted his body, flattening himself until he could slide through sideways, inch by inch. His mask banged against a jutting metal edge. The impact sent a sharp crack through the lens. His breath hitched. One more hit like that and the mask could rupture. He cupped a hand around the mask, shielding it, and kept going. The tunnel angled upward, not steeply, but enough that he felt the shift immediately. The air grew thinner, hotter, but it moved. Movement meant oxygen exchange. Oxygen meant there was an opening somewhere above him. He climbed with his elbows, dragging his body upward until his head bumped a slab directly above. He raised the flashlight. A concrete slab sat at an angle, a V-shaped void held open by a single collapsed support beam. Beyond that, a column of smoke rose upward into darkness. A chimney effect, a vertical air channel. It could be fatal. Hot gases travel upward. Flashover ignites upward. Running water. Not much. A trickle. A broken pipe. Somewhere behind the wall. He turned his head toward the sound, squinting through the haze. Behind a partially collapsed panel, he saw it. A thin crack of silvery movement. Fresh water. Cool water. Water that meant the building still had intact plumbing in places. water that led toward the outer walls, and maybe, just maybe, toward an exit. Daniel pulled himself toward the sound, one elbow at a time, one dragging breath at a time. Behind him, flames chased upward. Above him, concrete sagged. Below him, the darkness he escaped was waiting to swallow him again. But ahead of him, a trickle of water and a pocket of breathable air, and the smallest chance of making it out alive. He crawled toward it, and the building began to collapse again. The building groaned again, a long, shuddering tremor that vibrated through the walls like the mountains settling before an avalanche. Dust rained down on Daniel's helmetless head, coating his mask, clinging to his gloves, sifting into every crease of his gear. He pressed himself flat against the scorched steps, waiting for the shaking to stop. It didn't. The fire above him roared louder, a rising, hungry sound that echoed through the stairwell like a jet engine sucking in air. He knew that sound. Every firefighter knew that sound. Flashover approaching. The moment when everything in the room reached ignition temperature at once. A single breath could become a fireball. He dragged himself off the stairs as the air grew hotter around him. His flashlight flickered, its beam jittering across the smoke-filled corridor ahead. The narrow opening leading to the dripping pipe was still there, half hidden behind a fallen slab of drywall. But the fire's advance threatened to cut him off before he reached it. He forced one leg forward, then the other, pulling himself by his elbows, scraping his shoulders against jagged concrete edges as he crawled. His knees screamed with every shift in weight, a sharp white pain that threatened to rip him out of consciousness. He clenched his teeth so hard he felt his jaw ache beneath the mask. A wave of heat rolled down the stairwell behind him, so hot it felt like a wall of air being exhaled by something alive. It washed over his back, blistering against the fabric, superheating the metal buckles, making his SCBA cylinder click and creak as the temperature rose. He didn't look back. He didn't have time to. He reached the collapsed drywall and slammed his shoulder into it. The panel budged an inch, then jammed against the pipe behind it. He hit it again and again. Each hit sent debris falling into his helmet clip, rattling against his tank. On the fourth hit, the panel cracked, breaking free in a burst of ash and splinters. He dragged himself into the narrow gap behind it, a space barely wide enough to lie sideways, bordered on one side by broken studs and on the other by a concrete support column. The pipe was there, jutting out at an angle, dripping water that sizzled on the hot debris below. He pressed his face close to the trickle. Steam rose instantly, fogging the outside of his mask. But the water was cool at the source. He cupped his gloves beneath the pipe, letting them fill with enough liquid to wet the surface. Then he pulled his mask seal apart for a second, the briefest, most calculated breach, just enough to let droplets touch his lips. The water tasted metallic, sharp, poisoned by rust and ash. He drank it anyway. The shock of liquid on his tongue jolted him like an electric current, snapping him awake, firing adrenaline through muscles that had started to go numb. He sealed the mask again, just as a burst of flame rolled across the stairwell behind him, firestorming through the gap he'd crawled through moments earlier. The space he'd been lying in a minute ago was now engulfed in moving fire, a sweeping orange wave that devoured the air before retreating into the darkness again. He would have died there, burned alive in seconds. He didn't let the thought linger. He turned toward the narrow continuation of the gap, a tiny, splintered crawl space running alongside the wall. The air inside it moved, not much, but enough. A subtle draft glided past his mask, carrying fresh oxygen and the faint scent of outside air. An exterior wall, it had to be. Daniel jammed his shoulders into the crawl space, pushing deeper. The space pinched around him, squeezing his chest, pressing his tank against the studs. He rotated, shifting his body until he found an angle that let him inch forward. His gloves scraped dirt, insulation, broken wiring. His boots dragged behind him, catching on debris. He reached up with one hand, dragging himself forward an inch at a time. The fire behind him exploded, a violent blast, a deep, concussive thump that shook the entire building. A flashover. The flames rolled through the basement level with terrifying speed, igniting everything combustible in a single breath. Heat surged through the crawlspace. The walls glowed faintly orange. Smoke thickened, swirling around his mask. His cylinder gauge beeped again, lower this time. Too low. He forced himself forward, faster now, desperate, lungs fighting to pull oxygen through the respirator. His breath fogged the lens. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. The crawlspace angled upward again, his only lifeline. He climbed. His elbows dragged against splintered wood. His tank scraped metal studs. His gloves burned against hot surfaces. But he climbed, pulling himself towards the faintest glow of lighter gray ahead. Smoke thinning, air moving, a higher void, a break in the debris. His knee gave out completely when he tried to shift weight onto it, and he collapsed forward, face hitting the wood hard. Stars burst behind his eyes. He tasted blood inside the mask. For a moment, he almost let himself lie still. The fire crackled behind him. The heat pressed closer. The building groaned one final warning. He whispered to himself, "No, not here." He clutched the studs with both hands, dragging himself one last time through the narrowing walls until his head broke into open space. A small, dusty mechanical room lay beyond. Metal shelves, rusted maintenance equipment, a half-collapsed wall vent letting in thin, gray daylight from somewhere outside. Daylight. Daniel almost sobbed. He dragged his entire body out of the crawlspace and collapsed onto the concrete floor, coughing violently as the cooler air hit his lungs. His mask cracked inward again, the leak widening. He clamped his glove over it while pulling himself towards the vent. The metal slats were bent outward, warped by heat, but still intact enough to cover the opening. He grabbed them and pulled. They held. He pulled harder. They held. He braced both boots against the wall and yanked with everything left in him. The metal screamed and tore free, clattering across the room. Cold, fresh air hit him like a tidal wave. Not much, just a breeze filtering through a narrow external crack, but enough for him to breathe without choking on fire. He pressed his face close to the opening, inhaling deeply, letting the cold pierce his lungs like ice needles. He could almost taste survival. Almost. But the vent wasn't an exit, not yet. It was only a fracture, a hint, a promise of outside. The real exit was still deeper in the mechanical room, behind the broken equipment, past the melted shelves, toward the faint outline of a maintenance store buried in debris. And behind him, the fire had reached the crawlspace. Flames licked the edges of the opening he'd escaped through, consuming insulation, climbing the studs, hungry for oxygen, hungry for him. He had minutes, maybe less. Daniel pushed himself toward the maintenance store, breath ragged, body screaming, the world narrowing to one thought: out, out, out. Behind him, the building exhaled another deep, terrifying groan, and the fire surged forward. The fire surged into the crawlspace behind him like a beast breaking free of its cage. A wave of rolling orange light filled the narrow passage he had just escaped through, lighting the mechanical room in a pulsing glow that made every shadow stretch and crawl along the concrete. Daniel didn't look back. He couldn't. He pushed himself forward on trembling arms, dragging his battered body across the mechanical room's dusty floor. The air here was clearer, but only slightly, tinged with smoke, hot enough to sting the inside of his mask, but breathable. Fresh air still slipped faintly through the vent he'd torn open, but not enough to keep the room from heating fast. He scanned the space. Half-collapsed shelves leaned sideways, dripping melted plastic. A rusted boiler stood split open like a cracked ribcage. Pipes overhead hissed and spat small jets of steam where heat had warped their joints. The floor vibrated with the pressure of flames devouring the building above. There, at the far end, half buried under debris, barely visible through the haze, a maintenance sewer, dented, charred, but still upright. Daniel's pulse kicked hard. He crawled toward it, each movement shredding what remained of his strength. His knee dragged behind him like dead weight, sending sharp electric spikes of pain into his hip with every nudge. His gloves slipped on ash. His tank scraped metal, warning him that one more hard hit could rupture the regulator. But the door grew closer, and so did the fire. The flames from the crawlspace reached the mechanical room's threshold, licking the edges of the floor, igniting scraps of insulation and turning dust into swirling embers. The heat rose sharply, the kind of heat that meant the fire was searching for oxygen, hunting it, preparing to explode into whatever air pocket it could find. Backdraft conditions. Smoke thickened near the ceiling, swirling violently, drawn inward like breath. Daniel glanced upward instinctively. The smoke was being pulled toward the mechanical room door, not out of it, into it, which meant the fire was devouring air from behind him, and the room was seconds away from overpressurizing. He pushed faster. His gloves dug into the floor. His elbows dragged him forward until he reached the manual release handle sticking out from under the debris. A steel lever coated in soot, hot enough to blister bare skin. He grabbed it anyway. The metal burned even through his glove, but he held tight, trying to yank it free. It didn't move. He pulled harder, sinking his boots into the floor for leverage. The debris shifted slightly, but the door didn't budge. It was jammed under the weight of collapsed concrete and twisted pipes. Come on, he whispered through clenched teeth. Behind him, the fire hit the base of the crawlspace opening and burst into the room, rolling low at first, then swelling as it found a fresh pocket of air. A low, monstrous whoomph filled the space. The fire expanded. Heat punched him in the back. The room roared like an engine. Daniel yanked again, muscles trembling, lungs straining inside the failing mask. Still nothing. He crawled upward along the debris, searching for a different angle. A beam lay across the top half of the door, wedged tight between the boiler and the collapsed ceiling panel. If he relieved even an inch of pressure, the door might shift. He climbed the pile, hands slipping on dust-coated metal, knees dragging painfully, until he reached the beam. It glowed faintly with heat, but the ends were still cool enough to grab. He lifted. The beam moved a millimeter. A seismic groan rolled through the building, and dust fell like rain. He lifted again, this time with everything he had left. His arms trembled violently, his vision blurred. Every muscle screamed. His breath came in ragged gasps. The beam lifted 2 centimeters, then 4. He held it there, shaking uncontrollably, waiting for the door to settle. Behind him, the fire surged higher, flames reaching the ceiling, turning the mechanical room into an oven. The air inside his mask grew thin. His SCBA alarm chirped, shrill, echoing, urgent. Low air. Minutes left. The beam slipped in his hands. He threw his shoulder under it, wedging himself between the metal and the debris. His body took the weight, muscles spasming from the strain. He screamed through the mask as the heat seared through his gear. The door shifted, just 1 inch, but enough. He slid out from under the beam, nearly collapsing as the weight released. He fell toward the door handle and yanked it again, harder, angling his entire body downward. This time it moved. A grinding, crunching sound filled the room as the door scraped through the debris, opening a crack just wide enough for him to squeeze his arm inside. Fresh air hit his fingers. Real air, outside air. He tore at the door with a desperation deeper than fear, something primal, instinctive, the will of a human refusing to die in a burning tomb. Metal shrieked as he forced the gap wider, pushing debris aside with shaking hands, using his hip, his shoulder, anything he could. The door opened enough for his body, not comfortably, not safely, but enough. The fire roared behind him, a living monster ready to swallow the room whole. Daniel threw himself through the gap. He tumbled onto the floor of the next space, a maintenance hallway, cold air hitting him like a punch to the lungs. He slammed the door behind him with the last of his strength. The fire struck it immediately. Boom! A pressure wave rocked the hallway as the door bulged outward from the heat. The walls shook. A metal panel fell from above, clattering onto the floor next to him. But the door held, barely. Daniel lay there in the cold hallway, coughing inside his mask, chest heaving, body trembling uncontrollably. The air was clearer here, the smoke thinner.
the space lit by faint fluorescent lights struggling to stay alive through the power failures. He had escaped the basement. He wasn't safe, not even close. But for the first time since the collapse, he was in a part of the building that hadn't tried to kill him yet. He pushed himself onto his elbows, vision swimming, then onto his knees. At the end of the hallway, barely visible through the haze, a red exit sign flickered. Half dead, erratic, barely hanging on, but glowing nonetheless. Daniel dragged himself toward it. Behind him, the basement burned with the fury of a beast denied its prey. Daniel pulled himself down the maintenance hallway, dragging his injured leg behind him as if it weren't part of his body anymore. The cold air here was thin and metallic, tinged with the faint smell of ozone from failing electrical lines.
The fluorescent lights overhead flickered in uneven pulses, painting the hallway in stuttering flashes of white and shadow. His breath rasped inside the cracked mask. Each inhale was harder than the last. His SCBA alarm chirped again, louder this time, faster. A warning, a countdown. His air was dying. But the exit sign glowed ahead, a trembling, ghostly red beacon in the smoke. He crawled toward it. Every movement came with pain. His gloves slipped over debris. His knee buckled each time he tried to put weight on it. His arms shook with exhaustion, fire-fueled heat still radiating through his bones. But he kept moving. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. More turns, more debris, more heat pockets leaking through cracks in the walls. At one corner, flames licked up from a ruptured electrical box, sparks dancing across the floor like fireflies from hell. He hugged the opposite wall, sliding past the heat, feeling it sear the fabric of his sleeve. His flashlight dimmed, flickered, then died completely. Darkness swallowed him again. Only the exit sign remained, glowing, pulsing, growing closer. He reached the intersection before the last stretch of hallway and stopped. The floor in front of him was gone. Not blown outward, not collapsed inward. Completely torn apart. A hole 4 meters wide, splitting the hallway in two. The fire had eaten through floor supports, and the entire concrete slab had fallen into the sub-basement below. From where he lay, he could see the drop. Jagged rubble, metal shards, flickering firelight below. No way to walk it, no way to climb down and back up. The path was severed. The only way across was a single, half-melted metal pipe stretching from one end of the gap to the other, suspended, swaying slightly from the heat waves rising beneath it. A balance beam over fire. Daniel stared at it, chest rising and falling rapidly. His mind screamed, no. His body screamed, you can't. His knee screamed with its own broken electric agony. But the fire behind him roared, exploding into the maintenance hallway with a hungry breath. Flames rolling low across the floor, devouring the oxygen he had left. He had seconds, not minutes, seconds. He dragged himself up, leaning heavily on the wall. His injured leg nearly collapsed beneath him, but he bit down on the inside of his cheek and pushed through the pain. He stepped onto the pipe. It groaned under his weight. Smoke drifted upward from the burning sub-basement below, warm, thick, stinging his eyes even through the mask. The pipe vibrated from the heat expansion. His foot slipped once, and his heart slammed into his ribs. He dropped into a crouch, hugging the pipe with both hands, inching forward slowly. His boots scraped metal. Sparks flickered upward from below, landing on his coat, sizzling. Halfway across, the building shook again, a violent jolt that nearly threw him sideways. He froze, arms wrapped tight around the pipe, every muscle seizing in fear. Debris rained from the ceiling in hot, smoking chunks. One piece struck the pipe inches behind him, bouncing off and falling into the flames beneath. He breathed. Once, twice, then moved again, inch by inch, boots sliding, hands burning on the heated metal, mask hissing with every breath. His SCBA alarm shrieked nonstop now, low air, seconds left. He reached the end of the pipe, threw himself onto the opposite edge, and rolled hard onto the floor. His knee screamed, his back hit the wall, his body shook violently. But he was across. And 10 meters ahead, the exit door stood in the flickering red glow. Daniel tried to get up. His legs didn't cooperate. He crawled. 5 meters, then 4, then 3. Smoke thickened again, drifting from cracks in the ceiling like black ghosts. Heat pulsed through the walls. Flames howled behind him, chasing down the hallway like a living thing that refused to let him go. He reached the exit door handle. He grabbed it. He pulled. The door didn't move. He pulled harder. Nothing. His heart dropped. His breath hitched. He put both hands on the handle, planted his boots, and yanked with everything he had left. The door didn't budge. It was locked, sealed, or warped shut by the heat. For the first time since the collapse, Daniel felt something cold and shaking, clawing its way into his chest. No, not here. Not after all this. He slammed his shoulder into the door. Pain shot down his side. He hit it again. His vision blurred. His breaths turned sharp. His mask hissed, the leak widening under pressure. He stepped back, lifted his boot, and kicked the door near the hinges. A dull metal thud echoed. He kicked again and again. His boot split the weakened metal around the latch. He kicked one more time, screaming into the rasping oxygen, and the latch snapped. The door flew open. Cold airflow hit him like a tidal wave. Not fully outside, but a small concrete stairwell leading directly to the back parking lot. A dim gray light filled the space. Snowflakes drifted through the opening at the top. Snow. Fresh air, freedom. Daniel staggered into the stairwell. His legs buckled halfway up the steps, and he crawled the final meters on hands and knees. His mask fogged. His vision tunneled. The alarm screamed in his ears. His glove reached the final stair. Then his hand touched snow. Cold, soft, real. He dragged himself out of the burning building, collapsing onto the open pavement just as the wall behind him buckled and blew outward in a blast of heat and smoke. Firefighters at the perimeter spun around in shock. Voices shouted, "Man down! Get EMS now! Holy, is that Cole? He's alive!" Boots thundered around him. Gloves touched his shoulders. Hands pulled off his cracked mask. Cold air hit his face like a punch. He gasped, a long, ragged inhale, the first breath of true, clean air he'd taken in nearly 7 hours. The world blurred. Voices echoed around him, muffled and frantic. And Daniel Cole, the firefighter they'd mourned, the one they'd left for dead beneath burning concrete, closed his eyes. Not because he was giving up, but because he'd finally made it out, alive. The world came back to Daniel in pieces. First, the cold. Not the biting snap of winter air or the shock of snow on skin, but a softer cold, controlled, artificial, the kind that hums quietly through vents and wraps itself around hospital sheets. Then the sounds, beeping monitors, footsteps, voices murmuring in calm, steady tones. Then the light, bright, white, clean, so different from the angry orange that had nearly swallowed him alive. He blinked awake, eyes adjusting slowly. His throat felt raw, scraped clean of moisture. His lungs burned with every breath, not with fire, but with healing. His body felt heavy, wrapped in layers of bandages, tubes, and the soft weight of survival. A shadow moved near him. Captain Halpern, older, tired, eyes red, not from smoke this time, but something deeper. "You're awake," the captain said softly. Daniel swallowed. It hurt like hell, but he forced a rasped word through his worn voice. "Hey, Cap." Halpern exhaled, a long, shaky breath that didn't sound like a captain's, more like a father finally letting his shoulders drop. "You scared the hell out of us, Cole." Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. "Thought I was dead, right?" Halpern didn't answer immediately. He pulled a chair close and sank into it, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I called you lost." A pause. "I called the retreat." The admission hung heavy in the air. Daniel stared at him, eyes softening behind the oxygen tubing taped to his cheeks. "You couldn't have known." Halpern shook his head. "Doesn't matter. I did what the book says." But when they pulled you out of that back lot, his voice cracked, just once, but enough. I thought I'd never be grateful to be so wrong. The door opened quietly. Ramirez stepped in. His usual smirk was gone. His eyes were glassy. He stood by the foot of the bed, staring at Daniel like he was a ghost. "You look like hell, rookie." Daniel tried to smile. "You should see the building." Ramirez didn't laugh. He moved closer, gripping the metal railing of the hospital bed. "We found your helmet in the basement," he said. "Melted. Thought you were under it." He swallowed. "I told Halpern you were gone. I told him no one survives that." Daniel let the words settle. He didn't blame them. He would have believed the same thing. 7 hours, Ramirez said. 7 hours you were under there. We had no radio signal, no thermal readings, nothing. He leaned forward. "How did you even breathe?" Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, the memories flashing like after images of fire. "Smoke pockets," he whispered. "Water puddles. Air gaps." A pause. "Crawled. Until I couldn't. Then crawled again." Ramirez shook his head slowly, disbelief softening into something like awe. "You shouldn't be alive." Daniel opened his eyes. "Yeah," he whispered. "I know." A nurse entered, adjusting his IV line, checking monitors. She smiled gently. "You're a miracle case, Mr. Cole," she said. "Your lungs are damaged, but you'll recover. You've got burns, dehydration, smoke inhalation, severe bruising, and a sprained knee. But you're here." Daniel looked toward the window, pale light spilling through like a promise the world had kept for him. Snowflakes drifted lazily past the glass, each one soft and quiet, worlds away from the fire that had tried to take him. Later that night, when the room grew still and quiet, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The fire was gone, the screams, the collapsing steel, the choking smoke, all gone. But in their place, he felt something else. Not fear, not the shaking adrenaline of death narrowly avoided, but a deep, unshakable clarity. He survived, not because he was lucky, not because someone found him, but because in the darkest, hottest, deadliest hole under that building, he refused to stop moving. He closed his eyes and breathed, slow, steady, clean air filling lungs that had earned every molecule. A soft knock broke the silence. Halpern stood in the doorway again. He didn't speak at first, just looked at him. Then he stepped forward. "Daniel," he said quietly, "when you're recovered, the department wants to recognize what you did down there." He swallowed. "Surviving that wasn't just luck. It was training, grit, and something I can't teach." He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You crawled through hell, son, and you didn't let it keep you." Daniel looked up at him, eyes tired but steady. "Cap, I didn't survive to be a hero." Halpern nodded. "I know." A beat. "You survived because you weren't done yet." Daniel let the words sink in. Warm, grounding, true. Outside the window, snow continued to fall. Soft, silent, pure. A world away from the flames. And as Daniel closed his eyes again, breath evening out, the final truth settled inside him like a quiet heartbeat. He hadn't just escaped a burning building. He'd walked out of his own grave, alive, scarred, but unbroken, and ready, someday, to walk back into the fire again, because that's what firefighters do.